Wait for our recording to kick in. Right, let's go.
Can't hear it, John.
Can you hear it?
No.
Oh. All right, I'll overdub it later. Hang on a minute. I have shared.
I could hear it, but just about. It was very mellow.
Really?
Yeah, there was some sound coming through.
Is that coming through now?
Very faint, but yeah.
Yeah, very faint.
Hey everybody, my name is John Lund, aka Johnny Chips, and I live in Switzerland. I work with VPN in the UK. My name is Ahmed Laza, and I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft.
Can't hear it.
I'll overdub it. Can I just mouth what people are saying? Here, I'll do it. This is George. He's a senior engineer. This is Richard. He's a member of the Welsh Azure User Group organising team. That's a bull. Say hi to a bull. And that's the team. Did you like my overdub? Did that kind of fit? Was I in lip sync with people?
Just about.
Right, let's move on. So yeah, that was our Welsh Azure User Group organising team. So as always, we say hello and welcome you to this month's User Group session on the 16th of February, and it's 2022. As usual, just want to flash up everybody's picture there so you can see who is actually behind the Welsh Azure User Group. It's a user group for the community, as we were saying there before we kind of made a start. We're really keen to kind of grow this, not just in the virtual fashion that we've done over the last 18 months. Well, actually, it's probably coming up to 2 years now, can you believe? In a couple of months, we'll be 2 years with the user group. But when we get back to in-person events, we're super keen to kind of reach out to the local vicinity in and around Wales, so that we can do hybrid events, so that we've got an audience to actually talk to and eat pizza and drink beer with at one of those events. So anyway, feel free, reach out to any one of us, say hello, give us some feedback, any suggestions, and if you want to speak at the events, please do reach out and say hello and get involved. Basically, it's a community user group. So moving on to this month's event, we've got two awesome speakers for you again this month. So we've got Heiko Brenn, who's going to talk to us fairly soon around getting rid of recurring Azure management tasks using PowerShell in 5 steps. And after that, then we've got Marcel, who's going to talk to us about automate Azure Resource Decommissions with tracking. So we've got those two sessions lined up for you now. So huge thanks before we start to the speakers for joining us tonight. They're both there on the screen. So say hello, go and like and follow them on the socials and do all that good stuff, and get involved with them. So time-wise, obviously we're kicking off saying hello now, a bit of an introduction. Got a couple of slides to run through, a few housekeeping bits and pieces just to run you through. Heiko's talk will be kicking off in about 10 minutes time, probably a little bit sooner because I've not got too many slides again. And Marcel is around about 7:30. As usual, we got the quiz, so please do stick around for the quiz. We're going to be doing it on Mentimeter again this evening because we're not using Kahoot. But there we go. So Mentimeter is tonight. If you've not come across that, it's just all over the web browser. So whether on your PC or your mobile phone, we'll give you the link to that a little bit later on. As usual, a couple of Amazon gift vouchers. And I think we've got some other prizes. Heiko has just informed me after the end of Heiko's talk. So I'll let him describe that to you a little bit later. So it's prizes for everyone by the looks of it this week, this month. So as usual, you've all got control of your own microphones to come off mute and say hello and things like that. But I'd like to remind everybody, please do be courteous to each other. There are no silly questions. If you don't know something and you're interested, that's the whole point of this group. Speak out. Drop your answers in the chat window to begin with. You've all got access to chat. Any comments, questions, things like that. I'll encourage the speakers to take a look at that, and if they can't, we'll call them out at the appropriate point. Stay on mute if you can to avoid background noise. If the speaker's invite you to come off mute, please do so. But like I say, you're in charge of your own microphones. We're all adults in this room, I like to think. So let's act like that, eh? Yeah. Please do leave some feedback for us as well at the end of the event. I'll flash up a QR code. It helps us kind of set up future events and make sure that we're kind of, keeping everybody that attends these events happy with the right kind of content, the right level, the right topics. And look, as we're an Azure user group, we are quite a broad spectrum. So whether that's kind of infra and apps or kind of app development kind of arena, we're trying to cater for that broad spectrum. But please do give us a feedback, because it kind of helps us shape that in the future. But more importantly, just enjoy the sessions and be as interactive as you can. Quick shout out to the sponsors. Servant have been with us since day one, pretty much. Huge shout out to those guys who help sponsor the event in terms of spot prizes and obviously merchandise and bits and pieces like that, and obviously food and beverages at the only hybrid event we've done, but we will hopefully be doing more in the not too distant future. Big shout out to Admiral. Again, they've been with us for about a year now. Obviously headquartered in South Wales, so it's really cool to have one of those big companies based in Wales actually one of the headline sponsors of the group. So thank you to those guys. And of course, NetApp joined us last year and yeah, basically gave us some support in terms of getting the group and getting the logistics and the bits of the back end systems up and running and paid for effectively. So huge thanks to all the sponsors for being cool and helping us support the group. A bit of movement in terms of meetup for the group. So as you know, you've registered an RSVP'd for this event via meetup.com, and just something to be aware of, but we're now part of the Azure tech groups, which is effectively, it's a conglomerate of groups that are run by Microsoft. If you head over to that URL, which is that meetup.com address there at the bottom, the Azure tech groups address, you'll notice we're part of this Azure tech groups, which is covering 139 groups worldwide. You can see there's that little arrow pointing, it is pointing at Wales, but you can see there's 139 groups, most of which are still virtual. So if you were ever struggling for any kind of content or event to join, and look, they're not all necessarily Azure groups, they're, they cover all aspects, I think is probably the best thing to say. So there's lots of different variety in there. So if you want to go and take a look at that, you can actually just head on over. You'll find us in there. And of course, RSVP to all the Welsh Azure user group sessions, without, it goes without saying, but you'll find a whole heap of other cool groups in there as well. So go and show some of the support to those guys as well. Quick shout out about an event tomorrow that myself and Mr. Fatunka will be on. It's part of the Microsoft UK Tech Community Day. There's an all-day event going on. If you want to register for it, it's aka.ms/community day. I think, Matt, we're on about 1:30, 1:45. We're doing a quick session on basically talking about all you lot. So everything that you have done for us over the last 2 years, we're coming on and kind of telling the wider community what we've been up to, the kinds of sessions that we've had. And look, there's some other really cool events. And I know Imran is on the call as well with us tonight, part of the Bradford Cloud Use Group. He's doing a session with Saj as well. So look, it's really a community day. There's some cool sessions. If you can, if you spare the time, just have a look. I think when you go to register, there's an actual agenda there with some timings and who's talking and what they're talking about. But yeah, please do go and get yourselves registered and take part and come and say hello tomorrow. So yeah, we're on with the big boys, Matt. I think we're on Channel 9, aren't we, or Learn TV, whatever they call it these days. I think so. I know I better brush my hair and trim my beard, I think. But anyway, look, let's move on with tonight's show. So as I said earlier, first up, we've got Mr. Heiko Brenn. Heiko, I'm going to hand straight over to you to introduce your session. Firstly, thanks so much for giving up your time and joining us tonight, and welcome to the group.
Thank you, John. Thanks for everybody for joining in, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to talk about PowerShell automation, our script runner solution, and also giving away 2 Amazon gift cards. So if you think the content was rubbish at the end of my session, you can still win 250, 250, pound, sorry, 2 Amazon gift cards for each £50. I will ask 2 questions at the end of my session, and whoever is answering correctly or is in the chat, the first is going to win. So yeah, so with that, I will start sharing my screen, and I will start bore you with a few slides before I actually want to show you a few things. So let's hope we get this to work. Step 1, sharing screen. So here we are, hopefully. Yeah, that should work, I hope. All right, so yeah, I want to talk about Azure, PowerShell, and ScriptRunner. So my name is Heiko. I'm with a company called ScriptRunner. We are based in Germany. And yeah, before I give a quick introduction, so this is the agenda, so to speak. I want to talk about Azure and PowerShell in general. So why does it make sense to use PowerShell to manage Azure resources, and then how to do that natively. And then I also want to, on top of that, want to show how you could use PowerShell as this great technology and take it a step further and standardize and delegate all kinds of tasks around Azure, but also other systems. And so to get rid of that recurring task. So the overall idea of ScriptRunner is to simplify the way you develop, manage, and delegate PowerShell scripts. That's the overall idea. And so that's our team. So here we were trying to stand just like the PowerShell logo. I hope you can kind of see it. We tried. Yeah, so we are into PowerShell management, and I think I have 4 numbers here. So this is actually our postal code in Germany. So we are based in the southwest of Germany. The solution has been around since 2014. We have 24 people working for the company right now, and we have around 1,600 PowerShell scripts on our GitHub repo, where I'm not going to show you all of them, but we're going to take a look at a few of them because I think it's pretty helpful depending on where you are on your PowerShell journey. And so there's a lot of, yeah, I think quite some interesting information there. So our goal really is also to help people, again, depending on where they are in their PowerShell journey, to maybe start or so we have, for example, we have a PowerShell poster, like the Get Help for your Office wall that you can get from our website. I'm going to put in the link in the chat maybe later as well. So that's something that is pretty helpful. And we just recently also published a cheat sheet for PowerShell and Teams, which is a PDF, 8 pages, which is a pretty cool thing. And we have one for Exchange. I don't have a slide for that, but it's still there. And quickly about myself. So I'm 52. I'm working for ScriptRunner. I'm in the industry for almost 30 years. I was administrator, consultant, product manager, and I'm into music. Yeah, if you want to get in touch with me, hit me up on Twitter, Heiko Brenn, at LinkedIn, GitHub, or good old email. All right, so with this, let's take a look at, managing Azure with PowerShell. So obviously there are many different tools and ways to manage resources in Azure. We have Bicep, we have ARM templates, we have PowerCLI, Azure CLI, and so on. And so I want to focus on 2 things: Azure Cloud Shell and the PowerShell module. And so because with both solutions, I think you can do quite some cool stuff. And why it's really cool to work with PowerShell if you're not already doing it. It's a great community. It's a great ecosystem out there where not just Microsoft is part of it, but also other major vendors, and of course the community, which is great to be part of. So yeah, if you want to do things with PowerShell and Azure. Yeah, two ways of doing that is one, using the Cloud Shell, which I'm going to just do a little examples there, which is pretty cool to do things ad hoc because you don't have to install anything. You just go to shell.azure.com or you go to the portal, and then from there you can go to the shell, and you can run your scripts. You can be on the command line. You even have a little editor, and you also make sure that you're always kind of on the latest version of PowerShell 7, because that's what's running in that shell, which is basically a temporary Ubuntu VM that you use whenever you open up and you start the Cloud Shell with using PowerShell there. And then, of course, we have the Azure PowerShell module or modules. So the AC module has been around for quite some time, and there are lots of what I call here sub-modules for AC compute and for the Azure AD. And so lots of, let's say, basically all the components that you have in Azure, you can manage also with PowerShell. And here you see a screenshot of the good old ISE. I'm still working with that quite a lot, I have to say, because most of the people I'm working with are still in the Windows PowerShell world, so to speak. And yeah, so to look at some use cases to use Azure and PowerShell, of course, you manage your VMs, your resource groups, your users, your groups. Of course, obviously doing bulk operations, create reports, and maybe you don't want to care about Microsoft having ideas and moving around features and buttons. So if you're on the on the shell, obviously it doesn't matter because you're just using the commandlets. And sometimes it's the only way to do things, and because things are not in the GUI. Yeah. So very quick view into this world of the Cloud Shell, which I have here. So here I am in my subscription at the moment. So getting my overview of my current VMs or resource groups, or which I think what is really cool also that you can use the Cloud Shell to also directly connect to Exchange Online if you want to do things there. So you can open an Exchange Online connection, so you get this session loaded into your Cloud Shell, and then you can start doing your get mailbox or whatever you want to do. So having this direct connection, I think, is really cool, especially for this ad hoc stuff. So okay, now I should be able. I only have the discovery mailbox in this account, so that's why it will not be very fancy. But okay, I think you get the idea. And also, I think another cool thing is using the Cloud Shell to kind of walk through your Azure resources, like looking at your directories into your virtual machines, for example, or your web apps or other resources or resource groups. So these are things that I think are really helpful, again, for doing ad hoc stuff. You can even use, there is a kind of an editor. It's obviously it's not as feature rich as VS Code, but it allows you to do and to work, to maybe write or modify existing PowerShell scripts. And so I think that's really a pretty cool thing without doing anything installation wise. And as I said, we are typically always on the latest version of PowerShell. So here we are on PowerShell 7.2.1. All right. And then, of course, also to give you a few examples, here we are then coming to the actual AZ PowerShell module, which gives you the full power of scripting, of automating, and getting all kinds of information from your Azure subscription. So here, looking for machines that are running, or looking for machines that are running that you want to stop, which would happen right here, where it's typically quite helpful maybe at the beginning to also use the what if parameter to see, okay, what would happen if I run that one-liner here, which I have in line 44, where obviously I don't have running ones, so maybe I should switch that to VM deallocated. Or maybe we get some better results here. Yeah, okay. So so that would be the machines that I would well, in this case, of course, not stop because they already stopped. So I would switch them to start. And so these are kind of very simple example of doing bulk work instead of going through the GUI and clicking on the VMs and then say, okay, I want to do this and this. Just to get familiar with the things in PowerShell, and then of course step by step, maybe making things bigger, starting to write your scripts, to not just maybe working with existing objects, but also maybe starting to get some data on your actual consumption, for example, or then the next step. So here we get some information about my current consumption in my subscription. And then, of course, we're talking about creating new VMs, creating new resources, which can end up also, of course, in something like this, which I'm actually using for creating training VMs in Azure, where I'm using these PowerShell scripts. Obviously, there are other ways of doing it, but in my case, I have a script here where the only thing that I'm really selecting is how many VMs do I need, and then in the background, everything is done by creating the VMs, by using invoke ACE VM run command to install all the components that I want, my IIS, Chrome, Notepad++, policies, make it, in this case, also make it a domain controller, creating all kinds of users, groups, in this case, also configuring the IIS, having a mail service and all that stuff, which is, I think, pretty cool, because, yeah, it allows me to say, okay, if I or somebody else needs a set of VMs to do a training for the next couple of days, I'm just saying, okay, how many machines do you need? And then I'm doing it. Now, the interesting part, of course, also is to say, okay, now I'm doing it myself, but it would be even better if maybe I could give that to somebody, maybe in the training department, who can do that themselves. Now, of course, the challenge is, number one, okay, I need to have the script. I need to have the right modules. I need to have the connections to my Azure subscription. And of course, I need to have the permissions to do that. And now, because I am the global admin in my Azure subscription, I can do all that with all these scripts and all the logistics around that and modules and stuff like that. And so that's where then the idea of ScriptRunner comes into the picture, to say, okay, all the great stuff that you can do with PowerShell, maybe also doing some bulk creation of Azure AD users by just pointing to and I have this down here, hopefully, just pointing to a CSV file where I have all my users and I have the groups that they should be member of, and then just firing up this PowerShell script, and everything else is done automatically. Again, that's something I can do myself because I have all this necessary knowledge and permissions. And so the next step typically would be, okay, now I have automated all this stuff for myself. And the next step would be, okay, how can I enable somebody, maybe in help desk or maybe other administrators, to also use that scripts that I already built or maybe I got from somewhere else, without the need of, number one, okay, teaching these people how PowerShell works, and without the need of giving permissions to these people, so they would become, have privileged permissions to, maybe being even global admin in my Azure infrastructure. And so that's where the script runner on top of PowerShell comes into the picture, where it's about Also kind of organize everything in a nice way, in the sense of, okay, maybe right now you have your scripts somewhere stored and you have your credentials and your modules. And then questions might come up. Okay, where is the latest version of the script? How can I give it to somebody else? How do I organize that in a central way? And this brings me to this, what I call 2 ways of using PowerShell. So one is you have all your scripts somewhere, and because you did it yourself, you know exactly where to go to run that. And then the other way would be, okay, I have it organized centrally, properly, security-wise. Everything is at its place, and I know exactly where to go to if somebody wants to do something with Azure VMs or creating new databases in Azure, or maintaining group memberships in Azure Active Directory. And so what's necessary to do that is really talking about standardization to make sure everybody uses the same script, the same version, and not different ones. And people are looking around where are actually the latest scripts. And this is really about centralization, bringing all the logistics into a central place, like the scripts, like the modules, having a secure way of managing the credentials, and having a nice way, an easy way to make this PowerShell scripts available in a way that really it's kind of not really PowerShell anymore. So front end wise, it's like taking any kind of scripts and transform that into just a web user interface, which then everybody can really use if it's out there. And even it could be people from line of business. And still, of course, we have this underlying PowerShell scripts, but all the complexity, all the logistics is managed with Script Runner. And on the front end side, it's really just, okay, what's the task? What the people should do? How they should be able to and allow to spin up new VMs, for example, or changing permissions, or creating app registrations, or whatever the use case might be. And so this is where this kind of 5-step approach come into the picture, where we say, okay, we start with centralizing all the scripts and modules. So everything is a single place, which also means, of course, in the background, you could synchronize that with your GitHub or TFS repositories, so that Script Runner is kind of using typically the scripts that have been tested and moved to the production branch, and then they become available to use and to run and to execute and to delegate. And then when we talk about credentials, you can, for example, use the Windows Credential Store, but you could also start implementing and integrating password servers, where right now we support 3 of them, CyberArk, Pleasant, and Psychotic, where whenever there's a credential necessary to create a session to one or multiple Azure subscriptions, we are going to ask in real time, we need the credential to establish this connection, run whatever script needs to be run. And once that's done, the credentials are obviously not stored anywhere locally. They are staying in the password world. And that's, of course, even another aspect of centralizing the whole way of the PowerShell logistics, so to speak. And then talking about permissions, if you think about PowerShell, the way that I just showed you being on the command, then of course I need to connect to Azure. I need to have the credential. I need to have the script and the module. Now, if you use your scripts together with Script Runner, it all centralized, as I said. So the only instance that actually runs the scripts is the Script Runner engine, which means only Script Runner needs to have access to the scripts, to the modules, and have the permissions to connect to the backend system. Which means if you think about delegating things that you built based on PowerShell to people, maybe other admins or help desk people or line of business people, over here, this could be just a normal domain user. And based on the delegation within Script Runner, you say, okay, this person is able to do things in Azure to spin up VMs, or maybe change VM sizes, or working with, again, app registrations, SQL, whatever the Azure service might be. And these users don't need to have any access to Azure and no privileged permissions, because everything is managed by a Script Runner. And based on the delegation, you decide, okay, what is the user allowed to do? And so we are transforming every script into a web user interface where you can also decide what should be visible to the user and what should be predefined in the background. And it's being used when we execute the scripts, but it's nothing that we want to, where we don't want to really have the user to look at it and, of course, not change it. And then step by step, you could add all kinds of use cases, where here you see these tiles that represent a use case. And depending on what scope a user has, there might be maybe 2 or 3 of these tiles, and in other cases maybe 20, because that's what these people have, or the scope that they have to do things in Azure or even in other scenarios, in other platforms. And then we're not only talking about this interactive usage, of course. The other one would be, okay, we are using that, we're running this PowerShell script on a schedule base, and or we are going to trigger that based on a workflow system, based on a Power App, based on SharePoint workflows, whatever. So to have this here available, so that there are three types of really running scripts interactively scheduled and event-driven based on REST APIs, basically. And so I want to show you how that looks, of course. So we're going to go back to my VM right here. So I just wanted to see if there's questions so far. No. All right. So here I am logged in as Tina, a user from the help desk team. And this is the script runner portal. And here I have 2 tiles. One is for running actions, as we call them, where in the background we have the scripts, and reports gives me an overview about the things that I already did, creating whatever action I actually ran. So if I click on run here, for example, I see all the tasks that I can fulfill, all the actions that I can run, in this case, based on Azure, for example, to, like, coming back to the script from the beginning, where I just type in how many trainings VMs I need, and everything else is done in the background automatically. So no script, no permissions, no modules. I'm just saying, okay, how many VMs do I need? And then everything is done in the background. The same is true, for example, of for creating actually a single VM, which could be, of course, another also use case here where I can select the operating system. I can choose my Azure region, and I can choose the Azure sizes. So as you can see, it's not just it's not like typing standard D2_V2 or whatever, because number one, which user would know what to type, and the other thing is I want to have control about these people not spinning up the most expensive VMs. So depending on their scope and their tasks, they can maybe spin up these 3 types of VMs, and that's it. So, and I'm going to do that, and then we look at the result later, because that might take a few seconds. So, and based on that, in the background, again, we have the PowerShell scripts now executing with script by script runner. But for me as a user, I don't have to care about that this is PowerShell in the background. And we can take this even further. I could say, okay, this is maybe something I'm going to integrate into an existing portal where I have the exact same functionality to, in this case, spin up a new VM with the regions and the VM sizes. And then that might be just really any kind of existing maybe self-service portal. And then I can allow people, based on their permissions inside of script runner, to say, okay, you can spin up this, you can create these VMs, or you can, in other use cases, you can modify group memberships, permissions, app registrations, and so on. So basically everything that you can do with PowerShell, you could bring into a form that is usable, I would say, by almost everybody, I would say. Okay, it's still running, which is great, because now we can take a look at the dashboard. And because we have this centralized approach, we can see all the activities, all the trigger of running scripts or actions, as we call them, here in the dashboard. And if something goes wrong, I can take a look at that to see, okay, what has been the reason. So I can go and see the report where I can actually see who triggered a particular action. /script in the background, what has been the parameters, what has been the reason in this case for the error. So here we obviously have had some authentication failure. So because again of this centralized execution, you get all this information and you can drill down, you can look at only the results of a particular user or a particular action or a particular target, as we call them. And so this really gives you the possibility to have one management plane, so to speak, to everything that has to do with PowerShell, which starts with the scripts. So here we have all the scripts that I'm having available here in my environment. It's like 1,200 something scripts, and we can take a look at the ones that I have for Azure. We also can see that we detect if script contains functions, so you can later on decide if you want to work with a function or with a complete script. If you say, okay, I'm at the beginning of my PowerShell journey and I don't have that many scripts to do stuff, you're happily invited to go to github.com/scriptrunner/action-packs, where we have, as I said in the beginning, about 1,600 scripts for all kinds of use cases that either shows you how a kind of best practice approach looks like to create your PowerShell scripts. You also might realize we already have some multi-language feature here there that we add to the default PowerShell functionality. Or you might see some let's say some new stuff where I didn't know I could do that with PowerShell, so maybe I just take this as an inspiration to do whatever I would like to do. So that's why we have these action packs, and so that's where we talk about the scripts. You could also even start, if you have the permissions, to modify and maybe add new scripts via a web user interface. So here again, I have all my scripts, and I can start taking a look at the code. And if I'm allowed to, I can check out. I can make some changes. I can check in again, and maybe hopefully I have some good commit messages here. And if I have multiple versions, I can take a look at my history. I can also see the diff between different versions, and I can go back to previous ones. So that's already a good start if you have multiple people maybe running and working with scripts. So to organize, to make sure nobody is overriding some scripts while somebody else is already doing some other things on the scripts. And you can work with multiple teams inside of the configuration, where you can say, I want to make sure that the Azure guys are not messing around with the Exchange scripts, and the SharePoint people are not messing around with the Azure scripts, for example. You could even import scripts, your own ones, or again, you can use our scripts that we have on GitHub to import them. So all this is really there to make it as easy as possible to work with your existing scripts, add new scripts, or modify existing scripts. And so based on the scripts, the next step is, okay, we need to have these credentials to connect to Azure. So these credentials can be either stored locally in the Windows Credential Store, as I said, or like in this case, they could be stored in a Pleasant Password server, which means in this case, I only have the ID of the credential and of course not the credential itself. When you talk about PowerShell 7, of course, it also could be the SSH keys that could be part of that. And then we have what we call the targets. And the targets are, for example, my Azure subscriptions. So based on the way I want to authenticate, or I need to authenticate, it can be good old user and password combination, or it can be app registrations or service principals to allow to connect and to use that configuration to later on let script runner know, okay, these are my Azure subscriptions. This is how you can authenticate. And we know we want to use the AC module, which is typically the default. Even though you can still see we have this good old Azure RM here as well. So this means that in your scripts, you don't need to use, and you don't need to take care of, connect AC account, and you don't need to you don't need to care about, okay, we need to load this in this module, because that's what we know as script runner when this is configured as an Azure target, that this is the things that we need to do, so that you can connect, that we can connect successfully, so that we can do whatever we want to do in the Azure subscription. And that brings us to the next step, where we then now can say, okay, we have the scripts, we have credentials, we have the targets, so all the logistics are there. And now we can say, okay, we want to allow people to do maybe things around my Azure VMs, maybe creating ones. And maybe we can also take a look at some reporting stuff as well, of course. So here, again, here I'm running that as an administrator. So that would be the typical testing if you do something new. So which also means, you see, okay, we have these parameters here. But what you also might realize, it's only 4 parameters. So there is no resource group. There is no, do we want to have static IP addresses or dynamic IP addresses? And that's because in the configuration, we set all of this information already. Like, okay, this is going to be the resource group name. In this case, it's fixed. This is the one that we want to work with. And then we hide this from the input form. We always want to have static IP addresses. That's our default. That's why it's hidden. So, which means all the parameters that you have based on your commandlets in your scripts are there, but you decide what is actually visible, and also what is visible in the sense of what kind of, in this case, VM sizes this person should be allowed to do. Now, we just saw, okay, there were 3 selections, but maybe for people with another scope, maybe it only should be 2 VMs, 2 VM sizes. And so what that means is that even though you have different scopes with like sizes, locations, groups, users, whatever, you don't have to change it in your scripts. So the underlying script in all these cases is the same. You're just changing the scope in the configuration in Script Runner, and then you start to delegate the right action, so to speak, to the right people based on either AD groups or Azure AD groups, obviously. That's the 2 default ways to authenticate with Script Runner. And so, which means, so now once you have configured that, you could say, okay, now I'm starting to delegate that to people in my organization. And that brings us back to, okay, this is here back to user Tina. So in the meantime, this VM had been created, and we decided that we have this little HTML result coming back. So which you can of course configure to say, okay, what should be part of that what comes back to the user. And yeah, so that really helps to make it as easy as possible for people who are not into PowerShell, just having to do a job to create, in this case, a new VM. And if it's end user scenarios, you could put that into as a widget into an existing website, as I showed you. And of course, in cases of reports, again coming back to this configuration here, you might say, okay, I want to have a list of all my existing VMs with all the information, and that should be done on a scheduled base. And then so I could say, okay, this should be run every day, or maybe it should only run over the weekend, and I want to get some information if something goes wrong, for example. So this would be the scheduled part of using Script Runner. And the way that we just saw that the user can pick and choose the scope is done based on queries, and queries could be as easy as simple as a static list, where we just show, okay, what are the actual allowed sizes, which means on the left side, that's what we saw. On the right side, that's what translates into the technical value, so to speak. And that can be done with scripted queries and with Azure queries. And I want to show you that in my in my Azure VM, because that's a pretty cool thing, I think. Because let's go here. So here I have my Script Runner VM running in Azure, as you can see. So I'm also logged in with an Azure account. And here I have a number of queries that you can use either based on, for example, the Microsoft Graph, where I'm just doing a little test. So here I get all my room mailboxes, for example. If I'm looking at this edit here, you can see that's, yeah, it's just a graph request, so to speak. So everything you can do with Graph, you can directly put in there. So you don't need to have any scripts to do that. And you could also use the resource graph to say, okay, I want to get all my, for example, here, all the information of all my existing VMs based on Custo, which means here in this case, I can prepare my query with whatever I want to have later on as a list. And because I can decide to have a JSON object, I get all the available properties, which I then later on can use in my underlying scripts. And of course, based on that functionality, I could say, okay, this would be maybe here I only want to show VMs from a particular resource group, which again comes back to the idea of having users with different scopes, because for users who are only responsible for this particular resource group, I would use this query and say, okay, this is your action and you are allowed to do things in this resource group, and other people would be allowed maybe in other resource groups, or if you have somebody who's responsible globally, would see all the VMs and then being able to do things there, or again, could be users, could be groups, could be any kind of object in Azure. And so that really gives you, I think, a very easy and powerful ways of using Azure, configuring these different use cases in a way that fits to your requirements and the way that you want to organize these use cases based on your underlying scripts, and then start delegating that to the right group of people. And again, having the centralized dashboard that allows you to see all that information of all PowerShell activities, which of course especially is interesting if you want to analyze stuff, which means we also have a lot of organizations that have other solutions that have some kind of PowerShell functionality, but it's again kind of decentralized. So it's okay, I need to get the script and the module over there and over there. And that of course becomes difficult to kind of get the overall dashboard. And so again, so this is where this approach of doing everything centrally really, I think, makes perfect sense. And so now, because this action that got triggered by Tina has been successfully finished, we can go to the report and again see, okay, which user triggered which action, what was the underlying target, what was the credentials has been used together with all those parameter values, the ones that got typed in interactively or selected interactively by the user, plus the ones that, of course, had been predefined, and then you get all the technical information about what has actually been done in the background with when this script got triggered. And so that really, I think, gives you a lot of possibilities to, as I said in the beginning, to take PowerShell as this great technology to do all kinds of maybe even crazy stuff, putting it into a well-organized box, so to speak, and then decide, okay, who is going to be allowed to use that in which way? Again, interactively scheduled or triggered by automation connectors, which would be the third way of triggering these actions or these scripts, where you can allow all kinds of systems to connect to a script runner. They have to authenticate, because based on that, again, we check if these systems are allowed to trigger these scripts. And even if that's not possible, we even have what we call email inbound connector, which is kind of for legacy systems where are not able to talk REST, but they can send emails in a well or properly formatted way that tells us run this action with this parameters and this parameter values. And that then kind of, yeah, works for this kind of system as well. And again, no matter how that's been triggered in all these three cases, we have all the centralized information. Plus, we also have not only the technical information here, we also have what we call the efficiency dashboard. For some, it's just a gimmick. For others, they like it a lot. But in both cases, I'm just going to show you that. The idea here is that for each use case, you can define, okay, how many minutes, how much time did I save by automating this particular task? And then we calculate how often this action got triggered. So we have the time, and you can also define an hourly wage, and based on that, you will see the savings here. So this is obviously something that typically, management likes a lot when they ask questions. Why do we actually automate? So what is the benefit? Why do we do it? So that might help to give this answer here. And what we also have here, because we have this centralized approach, we also have a real-time monitor. So no matter what has been triggered in the background, and maybe I'm taking something that takes a little bit without some interaction, or maybe we do this. Yeah, so we say, okay, let's see what's happening. If we go back to into the dashboard here as an administrator, I can see, okay, here I see all the current running actions. And so if something maybe also was going to the right direction, I could even cancel that execution here. If I would have multiple script runner instances, I would see all this information. So I have a real-time view on, again, all these activities, and I have the reports for the history of things that happened. And so with this, I would, number one, take a look at the questions. How authenticate with Azure to provision resources? Yeah, so this would be, as I showed, I think, based on what you configure how you configure the target. So whenever you create an Azure target, and obviously here you see, because you can do so many things with PowerShell, including Azure. So you have different target types, and whenever you use Azure, you configure the way that you want to authenticate, and based on the permissions that, for example, an app registration has, they can do things maybe with your VMs. Others can do things with your SQL or with your Azure AD. So that's really up to you how you organize that based on your security settings and the way you want to divide the maybe permissions and connections. All right. Let's go back here. So to sum up, what I was at least trying to show you is that based on this great PowerShell technology, with on top of that, with Script Runner, we centralize the scripts and modules. You have this secure credential administration. We have this auto-created web forms for admins, for helpdesk people, and for end users, which allows you then really to start to delegate recurring tasks. And based on this interactive usage, you can schedule script executions, or you can do it event-driven based on the REST API or this inbound connector. And we have this monitoring and reporting functionalities that allows you to really in detail see what's actually going on. So really the idea is we have this great technology with PowerShell, and based on that, on top of that, open the scope and the possibilities to not just being that's being done by some people in the IT department doing some magic stuff with PowerShell, but really bringing PowerShell to the forefront and make it something that can be, if you want, that can be really a cornerstone of your automation strategy, where then really the whole organization might benefit from, which also is pretty cool for the people who are writing the scripts, because then they are not just this people that doing the magic somewhere, but really they're also kind of being more present, because they're doing things where not just directly the IT team is benefiting from, but maybe developers, helpdesk people, end user, the DevOps teams, and so on. So this is really something that we also see quite a lot, where people say, oh, it's really cool to see how PowerShell can evolve from being that expert tool into a solution that is really something, yeah, again, that can be, if you will, kind of democratizing PowerShell, if that's a right word. Okay, so let's say if you want to kind of test that, so you just say, okay, this sounds quite interesting, but what Heiko told me is good, but I want to have some hands-on myself. You can download a solution, and you can test it for 30 days. We just released a solution, I don't even have a slide for that, that after 30 days automatically transform into a community edition where you can use Script Runner. There's a limitation on the number of actions that you can run per day, but from the functionality, everything is there, so you can do this after the 30 days as well. And I also, of course, would be happy to discuss some individual use cases, maybe. Oops. So we can get in touch directly. So this one might be a good time to maybe put in my contact data into the chat, plus the information about scripts and the poster. And I forgot to mention our email security ebook. Not email, my PowerShell security ebook. That also might be interesting. So with this, let's take a look at the chat before I want to just give away these 2 Amazon gift cards. Okay. There was a question about trying it out. So I hope that answered the question. So you can go to a website and just download it. And as I said, it's 30 days trial, everything is available, and we can either, of course, always extend the trial version if you need more time to test things, play around with the stuff, or it's going to switch to the community mode, so to speak, where you can still use it, and in a limited way, but it's still something that you can do. For example, you can use for scheduled actions that you want to run maybe every day or every week. All right, so with this answer, okay, question answered. So you still have 2 minutes, I think. So if you have questions and you want to come off mute and ask a question, you can do that. Otherwise, I will just ask my 2 questions to give away this 2 50-pound Amazon gift cards. So the rule is, so I'm asking it, and whoever types in the right answer the quickest in the chat will win. So the first question would be, from which country Script Runner comes from? All right. Okay, we have a winner. Okay, Paco was the first. Congratulations. I typed in my email address, but maybe I'm just typing it again. So just get in touch with me. So I have your email address, and then I can forward that to our marketing people, so they can send you the voucher. All right. Second question would be, how many password servers do we support at the moment? Oh, Nicholas, excellent. 3 is the correct answer. So congratulations again. Just send me an email, and then we will send you that Amazon gift card. So that was quick. Again, congratulations. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your questions. And yeah, over and out, I would say.
Thank you very much, Heiko. That was awesome.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think you managed to get all the questions sorted there throughout the session. So yeah, if everybody wants to use the emojis or come off mute and give Heiko a round of applause and thank him for his session, that was amazing. Nice to see you again, Mr. Brenn.
Same here. Same here.
Thanks a lot, Heiko. Right. So after one amazing session, on to another. So I think we won't spend much time. I'll just hand you straight over to Marcel to talk about automating Azure Resource Decommissions. So Marcel,
Alrighty.
if you are there,
Thank you.
over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me over with the Welsh Azure user group. Carrying on from Heiko's great speech, my talk will also be around PowerShell and how we can use PowerShell in the serverless world in Azure with Azure Functions. So I'll bore you a little bit with some slides here first. So I'll just share my screen just for one moment, and let me know if you can see that all right. You can see the screen.
Did you want to put your camera on, Marcel? Your camera's not on, but I can see your screen fine.
Oh, is my camera not on?
Unless it's my side. Yeah, there we go. That's better.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, let me introduce myself first. My name's Marcel Lupo. I'm a DevOps Architect Manager at Avanade. My details are on the screen here. My Twitter, my LinkedIn. I've got a blog on Dev too, and I've got a GitHub page. But carrying on from Heiko, I'm going to talk about. My talk is about one of the things about the cloud adoption framework, and one of those things is to do about decommissioning resources in Azure. Now, with tracking as well, and the technology I decided, or the stack I decided to use in this, is going to be a serverless function, because they're very nice and easy and lightweight, and they just work really well. I mean, I could have used automation accounts in Azure as well, but I'm a big fan of serverless functions, and especially that you can use PowerShell in serverless functions. So I'm going to show you some cool tricks today on how to do that. But first, I'll talk about what and why we want to do this, and why do we, what is the benefits here of doing this. So, when assets are not needed anymore, when they're no longer required to support a business operation, they kind of considered as retired and can be decommissioned, reducing operational costs. So when cost saving is a motivation, decommissioning is an important step. Until an asset is decommissioned, it continues to consume power, environmental support, and other resources that drives costs up. And after an asset is decommissioned, the cost savings can then finally be realized. So what are some of the challenges with that? So one thing that I've noticed as well in big environments with regards to this is a lot of admins and administrators and things, they kind of lose track of resources in an environment. There's so many environments, so many subscriptions, and people just lose track of all the assets and what's in use, what's not in use. Maybe there's something that someone tried out but it didn't work out, so you end up with all this stuff in Azure, and you're paying for that stuff just because it's there or on, for example, or server or whatever. So forgetting to decommission retired assets can lead to unnecessary costs, obviously, but also not monitoring and tracking those resources and assets can lead to basically losing track of the resources in an environment, especially if it's a very large environment. So inefficiencies like that can and retaining assets that's no longer required, that's retired, can cause costs to rise with no real benefit gained in that. Now, how can we solve that issue? So automation is a solution that we can use to automate that. And the solution I'm going to show you today is it's basically using tagging. So tagging resources. I mean, most of you who work in Azure already at the moment would probably be familiar with tagging resources. So tagging things to a cost center or a cost code, tagging things to describe them, tagging things for an environment. So what I'm going to do today is basically use a tag called decommission, and the value of the tag, a tag is basically a key and a value. So you can tag a resource with a key, which is going to be decommission. And a value is going to be a date value. So in the format of day to month, year. So that, and our automation is going to be a serverless function, which is basically going to run on a schedule that is going to look at the tags of the resources in an environment. And if it comes across a decommissioning tag, it will evaluate the date. And if the date is the date of the decommission or prior, it would decommission that resource and track that, as in audit that decommission. As well, if the decommission is not there, obviously the tag's not there, it won't happen. And if the tag is a future date, it would also just leave it alone. So what we're going to do is we're going to automate the life cycle of an asset through tagging to ease administration. Automating the decommissioning gives also more control over decommissioning. For example, if you have to stand up an environment that someone says, oh, we want this environment only for a week. Sometimes you might forget to decommission that because a lot happens. Everyone's very busy at work and a lot can happen in a week, and you could just completely forget to decommission that and in end of the week, and it would just make costs rise unnecessarily if you're a day or 2 or 3 late. So by adding a decommissioning tag to that environment, when you build the environment, you can, just not worry about it because it will be decommissioned at that date. So it kind of eases administration a little bit. Also tracking, I'm going to show how we can track those decommissions, whether they're successful or failed. A lot of people use tagging basically for reporting and monitoring based on tagging. So you can actually go and see which resources is going to be decommissioned when, if you do monitoring or reporting based on tagging. Also decommissions. One nice thing about this implementation that I want to show you is decommissioning resources is basically deleting them. Now, you need kind of a high permission to be able to do that, like a God mode permission. But if you automate the process, what you can do is, if a team is looking after, say, resources in Azure or a resource group in Azure or some resources, instead of giving that team access to be able to delete resources, they could have access to tag resources, and then you could kind of delegate the control to a team or a member to be able to decommission resources via the tagging. So rather than giving God mode permissions to someone to be able to just delete stuff, or a team, for example, you could just grant them the ability to put tags on their resource, and they can kind of self-serve their own decommissions if a resource is no longer required. So that kind of also alleviates administration overhead. And you can also always kind of block decommissions by using resource locks. And I'll show that as well in the demo that I'm going to show to you today. And then also it's just important to continuously monitor and track resources in Azure so that you don't lose control over what is there and paying for stuff. So that's the boring slide, but out of the way. So I'm just going to jump over here to my demo machine, and I'm just going to build a couple of things just to start off with. Now what we're going to use is we're going to use Azure Functions. It's a serverless function app running PowerShell as the code base. Now for that, I'm going to have to basically build a few things. So I've got a script here, and I mean these scripts are also on my blog. There's also a blog version of this, and a GitHub repo actually where you can find these scripts. So maybe at the end I'll put that in the chat as well for you if you wanted to go and have a look to build this in your own environment, for example. But we'll start off by, I'm just going to I'm using a combination here of Azure CLI and PowerShell just to build my my function app that I'm going to use to demo this. So I'm just going to log into Azure here real quick into my in my personal subscription. I've got my subscription open up here as well, so we can jump into that. So I'm just going to set up a few variables. like, for example, the resource group, the storage account that's going to be used by the function. In the function, we're going to basically, because the function app will have its own storage account that it's linked to the function app, we're also going to create two tables in the function, and one table is going to be called tracking or tracker, and the other table is going to be called filed. Because what we want to do is when this function is running and decommissioning resources, we want to kind of audit and track what it's being decommissioned using the tracker table. And if a decommission fails for any reason, we're going to capture that in the filed tracker table. So we're just going to use Azure table storage for this. And it's quite handy because the function needs a storage account anyway to operate. I'm just going to create these variables. I'm going to create a resource group called Automated Resource Decommissioning Demo. Like I said, the storage account is going to just be called decom.func.sa with a random integer at the end. We're going to have a tracker table. The partition key is going to be called decommissioned, and in the UK South. Now, what's also important about this function is we're going to give the function an identity, because this function is basically going to be a serverless PowerShell script that is going to run, and that function needs an identity to be able to be, so that we can give permissions against that identity. So what I've got here is I've got a variable called scopes, because when this function is running, it's going to check everything in the subscription. Now, because I only have one subscription, I'm just going to put one subscription in here. But if you've got multiple subscriptions, you can kind of put in the subscription ID of a second subscription, a third, a fourth, and a fifth, because essentially what this is going to do is we're going to give access to our function over the subscription to be able to read all the resources, the tags, and also be able to evaluate those tags based on date, and then be able to delete those resources. But we only want to cover the scope of a single subscription in this case. So I'm just going to create this resource group here real quick. I'm going to create the storage account that's going to be used by the function. We'll have a look at all the resources that's being created here in a moment as well. Next, I'm going to create the function, and you'll see that it's a Windows-based function. It's a PowerShell-based function, and we're going to use PowerShell 7. And we're also going to assign an identity for the function. So we're going to basically enable the system assigned managed identity, which will give this function an identity that we can assign permissions against. So I'm just going to create this function here. Now, we're also going to set up a few environment variables on the function in the form of app settings. And I'll explain this in a moment in a little bit more detail. Once the function is created, I'll go into Azure and explain this bit. But basically, the script in the function, because it's a PowerShell function app, we're going to configure a script inside of that function to run. And that script can basically access variables from app settings as environment variables. So I'm just going to set these up here real quick. Okay, that function app is run. It's finished, and we're going to create an app setting called function scopes. We're going to create resource group name, storage account, the table name, and the partition name. If I jump to my Azure portal at this stage, just to show you what we've built here, I've already got one which I've set up before, which I just use on my normal subscription, but for the demo purposes, I'm setting up a new one. So you'll see here, there's the storage account that is for the function app, and there is the function. Now, I just want to show you the identity part. So you'll see here that this function has got an identity that's enabled. and we'll come back to this bit in a moment. We're also going to just have a quick look at the configuration settings here, because these application settings, if I just going to filter down to function, these are the settings that I just basically spoke about, that that we're going to utilize some of these settings as variables in our PowerShell script, basically inside of the function. So just for now, just remember that these environment variables, we can actually use them in the script inside of the function app. And as you can see here, I've got function scopes as well. So, later on, if I say, for example, I wanted to add additional subscriptions to be scanned, I can come in here and I can add more than one subscription. I can add 2, 3, 4, 5, however many subscriptions I want this function app to be able to check resources. I can come and do that there. I also see I've got a table name for tracker and a table partition called decommission. But we'll come back to these app settings here in just a moment. The next thing is I'm just going to give myself some access to over the storage account, because what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to basically build the tables in the storage account that we're going to need. So I'm going to create 2 tables. I'm going to create a failed table and a tracker table, so that we can track, so that when this function runs, we can basically track when tables are being, when things are being decommissioned successfully and when things are being not successful. So let's have a quick look at that. If I go back to my storage account, you'll see in here now I've got 2 tables. One's called failed and one's called tracked. Obviously, they're going to have nothing in them. If I look at failed, you'll see there's nothing there. If I go to tracker, there's nothing there. We've not actually started using our function yet. The next thing that we want to do is we want to give our function some access. I'm going to give my action identity access to the storage account as a table data contributor, and also over the subscription as a contributor, because I need my function to be able to read tags. I need it to be able to delete resources if it needs to when it runs. So I'm just going to run that real quick there. It's just basically three permissions, and we'll have a look at those permissions as well in a moment. Once that's set up, it's pretty it does it pretty quickly. So if we now look at our IAM permissions over the storage account, we should be able to see that our decommissioning function has got table storage. There is our function. And also reader and data access over the storage account. In addition to that, if we look at the subscription itself, at the IAM, we can see that our function also has contributor access. It's going to be one of these 2 because I've got 2 here. 3165, it's that one. So you'll see here, 3165's got contributor access. Now there is one more step that we need to do here real quick. And I'm using a function app that is running on a consumption-based app service plan. What that means is when this function is not doing anything, we're not paying anything. But when this function is going to be triggered, it's basically going to spin up. What's happening in the Azure Fabric is it's going to spin up a machine, a Windows machine, and it's going to basically, because it's a PowerShell function, it's going to, whatever PowerShell functions we create, it's going to try and run that. Now, what is nice about the PowerShell function apps is we have under app files in this function, is we can actually say when this function app is warming up and starting up, we can actually preload some PowerShell modules into this function. And we're going to do this actually. So I'm going to use the AZ module and also a module called AZ table. Now to enable these to automatically spin up with the function is if we go under app files and we go under requirements.psd, you'll see that there's a, that one's already there and it's kind of commented out. What we're going to do is we're just going to uncomment that, and we're going to uncomment that, and we're going to save this. What this means is when this function app starts up, it's going to automatically load these modules into the serverless functions kind of machine underneath into the memory, almost like when you're importing a module that you want to run on your local machine. So imagine this function app is basically spinning up and it's importing these two modules. And we can add extra modules. You can see here you can add modules in from the PowerShell gallery as well, to basically spin up here. So just going to refresh that. Now, because this is a brand new function, I'm just going to restart this here after making that change, just before we start configuring our function. But this is all we need, right? We don't need anything else. It's just the resource group. We've basically got our consumption plan. We've got our function app. We've also got app insights linked in case we wanted to do some debugging or troubleshooting on the function. And then we've got our storage account, which we need. It's mandatory for a function. But what we've added extra is these two tables, one called failed, one called tracker. Now for the fun bit. So you literally just need this bit. And we can give this function extra permissions because it's an identity, but it's got already access over our subscription, so we don't need to go and give this. But if you had, like I said, if you had multiple subscriptions, you could just go to that subscription and give this function that extra permissions. To do that, I can show you how to do that manually. So say, for example, you had another subscription in here. You could just go into the subscription. You can go to IAM. You can add. Let me remove that permission actually, and then add it in again, just to show you how to do that. So it was this function here. Just going to remove that. So say you had multiple subscriptions. What you could do is you could just go to the subscription and add role assignment. I want contributor in my case. I'm going to use a managed identity, and I'm going to look for my function app, and it was that one, and I'm just going to add that and just assign that. So if you were to do that manually, you could just give that function access over the subscription that way, or additional subscriptions. Now again, as well, like I said, if you needed this function to scan additional subscriptions, you would pretty much come into the configuration under app settings and look for the scopes value, and you can add additional subscriptions this way. For example, just comma separated for this function to basically scan additional subscriptions, but we're not going to do that now. Now let's set up our function. So you'll see here we don't have any functions yet. Now, because this is a PowerShell based function, all we're going to do is we're going to basically write a PowerShell script. So this is almost like a script that is just out there on the cloud, that is just serverless, that is just going to run. So let's create a function, a script, and we're going to use a timer trigger. Now, the timer trigger, we can just call this auto is our function name. Now, the schedule uses cron. I really like it. It's a site called crontab, I think. Yeah, crontab.guru. This is a really nice site that I sometimes use to work out my cron jobs, because I'm not a cron job pro out of, just to think what I want. But say, for example, you want this function or this script to run every day, for example, 1 minute to midnight. Whoops, we'll just make that stop. here. Sorry, it's that. Goodness me, sorry. So I'm going to make that 59:23. I believe that is 1 minute to midnight every day. But you can use, I mean, you could set up any schedule you want, really. It's basically minute followed by hour. So I think that's 59:23. So in Azure, it doesn't show, I think the first one, it's got, I can't remember now if it's millisecond or not. Let me just see there. Yeah, so seconds. So in Azure, you've got seconds followed by minutes, followed by hour by day. So this is basically 1 minute to midnight every day. So I just want this to run once a day at midnight, but you can have it run twice or once a week, or how often. It's almost like a scheduled task. If you're used to Windows Server task scheduling, maybe you have a script that runs on a scheduled task on a server somewhere. This is basically just saying when, what schedule do you want to use this function, which is basically a script to run. What's nice as well about Azure serverless functions is, imagine you had a server in your environment which was running all the time, and you had a bunch of scripts, and you're running these scripts on Task Scheduler. That server is running, it's on all the time, you're paying for it. This function will basically spin up, run the script, and then destroy itself. And you're only paying for the amount of time. I think it works out about 3p per run or per day for this function to run. So it costs almost nothing to run this. So let me create that first of all. Now you can change, you can come back here. Let's that just create quickly. So you'll see here, there's my function, and it's basically using a timer trigger. Now, if you ever needed to adjust the time, the schedule of the cron job, you can just go into the function and go to integration. And under integration, you can go to timer, and you can basically come and change your schedule here. You'll also see that it uses a parameter called timer. Now, that parameter, if we go into code and test, because there will be like a basic PowerShell kind of structure in here. You'll see there is a parameter here called timer. So basically what happens is it's just going to send this cron job schedule in, and it's just going to evaluate the time based on UTC time. And it's just going to say, the PowerShell timer is running late if it's past due, or otherwise the, run. You can keep this here. It doesn't hurt to keep this here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some extra code into this basically run.ps1 PowerShell script. And what I've got here, let me copy this, all this code and paste it in here. And I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to talk through what this script actually does. And then we'll set up a few things to decommission and run it, and we can basically go through it. But what I want to show you about this run script is I've got two functions. First of all, when the function triggers, it's going to start up, it's going to run, it's going to import that AZ module, it's going to import that AZ table module as well. But in addition, it's also going to load in these two functions that I've written. Now, one function is called get resource group for decom, and the other function is called get resource for decom. So if we look at the first function, it has a few parameters. It's got subscription ID, it's got resource group name. It's going, it's got a tag key. Remember, we're going to tag our resources with a key value pair. The tag key is going to be decommissioned. The value is going to be a date value. And there's also a switch here called future, which is not kind of really used in this function app, but I thought maybe for future development, I could you know, because you can use these functions on a local machine as well to check which decommissions are coming up for the future. But we're not actually using this switch in this function. What this function is basically doing is it's going to connect to the subscription which it gets as an input, and it's going to use the date format of day, month, year. Now you can change this. If you're in the US, you can use a different date format. In the UK, we use dd/mm/yyyy to put the date, month, year. You can obviously change this if you want. This is just basically what the tag value needs to be. That we know that the tag key is going to be decommissioned, and the tag value is completely up to you. What it's going to do is it's going to basically get all the resource groups of the subscription, and it's going to create an object of all the tags. If the switch of the future tag is not used, it's going to say which resource groups contains my tag key, which is called decommission. And it's going to basically return those resource groups into an object. So obviously also it evaluates the date, and it will basically say if the date is less than the current date or equal to the current date, then it's going to return that resource group, and it returns it. We're going to use the resource ID of the resource group. But you know, all this will basically do is take all the resource groups. It will check if the tag is there, and it will evaluate the date. If it's today's date or prior, we need that ID, and it's just going to return that ID. This is the purpose of this function. The resource for decom is going to do a similar thing, except it's going to check every single resource within the subscription, and it's going to do a similar thing, and it's going to return, because we can tag resource groups or individual resources. So we're doing both. What it's going to then do is, now these functions are just functions. They're not actually things that they're not the script, but they're things that we're going to use in our script. So in our script, what we're doing, and remember, here is where I was saying that we can actually use the app settings of our function. We can use that inside of our script. And because this is a Windows PowerShell function, it means the underlying operating system is Windows, and we can actually, look at environment variables within that operating system using the env variable. So if you see here, I've got env function scopes. This pretty much means, if I just quickly jump back to my function here, if we go back to the configuration settings, under app settings, you'll see here my scopes, my function scopes. I can access that as an environment variable inside of my script. So what we're doing essentially in our script, oops, didn't mean to open Visual Studio there, but what we're essentially doing is we're getting our scopes from our function app settings, and we're going to say just create an array of the scopes. And we also have we're also reading in our function resource group name, our function storage account name, and we're just basically assigning those values as variables in our script. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, go and get the tracker storage account. And then what we're doing is we're going to create an empty variable array that is going to say which resource groups matches our criteria. And we're using that, we're basically connecting to the scope, to the first subscription in our scopes. And we're saying, go and get all the resource groups for me in that subscription. And then we're saying that function that we've imported here into our function, which says, go and get the resource groups that needs to be decommissioned. We're basically running that. And we're saying anything that matches. Now, remember, the matching criteria is if the tag is there and if the date value is today or earlier. We're basically returning all of those resource IDs of those matched resource groups into our array here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say, for each of the resource IDs of our resource groups, we are going to remove that resource, and we're going to use an error action to continue. We don't want our function to stop working if it finds a resource that it decommissions. We're going to let it carry on running. But what this little dollar question mark means the previous process. If the previous process was successful, we're going to log that entry into our table storage and say, create the resource ID that was decommissioned in our table. Otherwise, record it in the failed table. Now, I've also got a failure message here. I'll go into that a little bit later because we can actually look at what the failures were, if there were any. We're kind of doing the resource groups first because they are kind of the low-hanging fruit. We don't want to look at all the resources. We're just going to do all the resource groups first. And then because the resource groups are maybe full of resources, we just want to remove resource groups that we don't want first. And then any individual resources afterwards, we're doing basically the same thing. We're saying, get all of our resources and then, match the criteria again for resources that needs to be decommissioned. If there are any matching criteria, remove those resources and record it, otherwise not. And this is pretty much all that our script is going to do. It's just going to evaluate tags and remove resources based on those tags. Now, let's try this out here real quick. So I'm going to just create a resource group here. I'm going to call my first resource group RG1 in UK South. I'm just going to create that. I'm going to create another resource group. Let's call it RG2 in UK South. Create that. And I'm going to create another one, resource group 3 in UK South. We'll do that. So here I've got 3 resource groups. Now, in my first resource group, I'm going to create a tag. I'm going to call the tag decommission. And I mean, today's date is the 16th of Feb. Now, remember, in our script, we use day, /month, month, /year, year. You can change that to whatever you want. If you're in a different geography, like maybe the US or something, or use a different way of interpreting the date. But let's say today's date, and we're just going to do that and apply that decommission tag on this first resource group. My second resource group, I'm going to do also today, but and I'll come back to that one in just a moment. And then my third resource group, actually my second resource group, let's do that in the future. So let's say on the 20th, I want that decommissioned. And my third resource group, I want on the 24th decommissioned. In my third resource group, I'm also going to just create a few resources here. I'm just going to create a storage account. I think they're the quickest and easiest to do. Let's do a storage account. I'll just call that resource group 3 for PWD 9000 SA01. Let's do that in UK South standard. And I'm going to put a tag on here to be decommissioned today. create that. And I'm going to create one more storage account in resource group 2 this time. And again, like I said earlier, what's nice about this solution is you don't have to give people access or teams access to be able to create or delete, well, to be able to delete resources. You could just kind of give people access to be able to tag stuff. And that should be sufficient for them to be able to use this automation. So I'm just going to do PWD SA 9000 SA02. Just going to do that in UK South. And for this decommission, I'm also going to put today's date. But I'm going to do something different on this storage account once it's finished, just to show you. So say, for example, because removing resources is kind of a, can be, it depends, you know, how strict the environment is, because sometimes people are a bit scared to remove resources. Maybe you want some sort of an override to be able to not decommission that resource. Now to do that, for this second storage account here, once it's created, let me go to the resource here. It's not showing up yet for some reason. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a lock, a resource lock on this resource. I'm just going to add a resource lock, and I'm just going to call this prevent delete. And it's going to basically, if anything tries to delete this resource group, it's going to not allow that. It's basically it's going to make the function not work on this particular decommission. But we have our 3 resource groups here now. We've got RG1, which is going to be decommissioned today at 1 minute to midnight. Our function will run, it will decommission that. Resource group 2, if we go to that one, it's got a tag to decommission on the 20th, but it's got a storage account in there which is decommissioned today, but it's got a lock on it. So this one will probably not work in the decommissioning process. And then RG3, we have a tag as well for the 24th, but we have another storage account 1, which we do want to be decommissioned. So you could kind of add your tags. So now, what I'm going to do with this function, I could either not do anything. This will run based on my timer at 1 minute to midnight, and it will run that script. But I can run this script manually by going to the function, the auto decom function. And under code and test, I'm just going to go ahead and run the test, and I don't need to give it any inputs or anything. I'm just going to go run. And if we look at I find that sometimes it takes a little bit of time to warm up the first function. So it might take a little bit of time here for it to start showing up what it's going to do. Also, it's because it's a brand new function that those modules that we configured in the beginnings, getting them in there the first time is a little bit of a slow process, but after that, it will just go very smoothly on that whatever schedule that is. But I'm going to try and run this here on this brand new function here, and hopefully, let me just try and run that again. Just want to see this coming up on here. There we go. Hopefully that will start trickling down the logs here. Let me just see if there's any questions so far. Yeah, no questions so far. That's good, I guess. a good sign. Let me just refresh that. We'll also see when this function finishes running, we will, under monitoring, we can see the full log of everything that's happening under here once it's finished running. I think this function is just taking a little bit of time to warm up and start up. You can have a look on here as well. Let's see. Trigger that one more time. Let me, when that is, while that's running, I'm just thinking if I should show you the other function, the monitoring, the logs on it. Let's see. See if this kicks in or not. It should do. The first time I ran this on it took like 10 minutes for the very first time. But let me just have a quick look at the previous one I have here, which I run in my own environment on a daily basis, just to show you. We'll come back to the other one in just a moment. If I go to, I wanted to kind of show you the monitoring aspects of it. So if you go to the function under resource decommission, under monitor, you'll be able to see all the runs, the successful runs under here. And if you go into that, it will basically show you all the output from the script that was run. So, you know, it loaded the AZ accounts, it's executed everything. It didn't find any resources to decommission or anything like that. So I'm hoping this will kick in here. See if my resource groups are still there. They are. Run that one more time. Keep that run off. Bit slow. Like I said, the first time it takes because it has to get those modules onto that runner that's underneath. If it doesn't go through on this attempt, I'll just run the other function, which is exactly the same pretty much, but with all the modules installed. Okay, so it looks like it's oh, it's actually timed out. So let me refresh that. And then we'll run it one more time. Yeah, so you see it's giving me a warning now that it's saying that it's downloading those modules, those dependencies. Like I said, once you set this up, if you just leave it for like a couple, maybe half hour, it will get all those modules loaded in. So I'm going to leave this now because there's no point in waiting for it to basically install those modules. But if we take a look at one that's already you know, kind of working with all the modules onto it, if I run this function manually, let's take a look here. And it's exactly the same. Everything's the same as the other function. The other function obviously just has the task of running the. Unfortunately, the runners underneath the consumption plan is not really that big. The virtual machines, they're quite tiny, to be honest. So getting those modules, obviously, imagine installing PowerShell modules on a one CPU VM. It's going to take a little bit of time, but once that function is, mature, I would say, you'll see something like this, where it's got the modules, everything's fine. It's going to then load those modules in. It doesn't install the modules every time. It kind of retains them. So once the function is like I said, the initial function will take half an hour to sort itself out. But once it's done, anything from there on in will be just seamless. So you'll see here it's found resource group 1, and it's going to decommission that one. So what it's doing based on our script is it's evaluating all our resource groups and the tags of those resource groups. Afterwards, and you can see here as well, it's actually written the entry into our table storage. And now after that, what it's going to do, after getting the resource groups out of the way, it's going to evaluate the resources, because we can tag either at the resource group or at the resource layer. So what it's basically doing now is it's running that against the resources. Let me refresh that. Should see that coming up in a moment with the storage account. Well, while that's running, let me just quickly jump to the storage account and we'll look at the tables. And if we look at the tracker table, we can see here that, I'll just make this a bit smaller. The tracker table, we can see that the RG1 was decommissioned. You'll see that I actually replaced the / with semicolons, because you cannot use special character like / in Roki. So when I take the resource ID in that script, I just replace the / with a colon. But I can basically see that, resource group 1 was decommissioned, and it gives you a timestamp. So it gives you a nice tracker table of the successful decommission. And if we look at the failed ones, we can see here that this storage account, SA2, failed. Now, we can come in here and go, okay, well, why did it fail? So if we go back to our function, this is where the monitoring comes in quite handy. So if we go into resource decommissions, that monitor section, we can actually see the run here. So if we take a look at the run, we can see, actually, is that running? Oh, it's not, it's still running here. So let's just wait for that to finish. But we should see another entry come in here that will give us the full error. Now, I do have, I see, yes, so I see, Nicholas, thanks for adding the blog actually that covers this document, this demo in a blog version. I have a second, on that same blog, a second link to how we can make this even better. So the second part of my blog loads in a third function. So the third function I have is to be able to send emails through a service in Azure called SendGrid. So if you've got a SendGrid account and follow my my blog post, you can actually add another function in here which will utilize SendGrid, in which you can then basically take this failure message, or you can even create a success message. And when this function is running and actually decommissioning resources, you can actually receive an email from SendGrid to say these resources have been decommissioned today, or these ones failed. And you can even have the error in that email. And it's just by loading that function, using SendGrid and loading that function into our serverless function here. So I'm hoping this will now have our monitor. No, it's still running there. So it's just a bit slow, I think, in a demo to show. But if we have a look at our resource groups, we can see resource group 1 is decommissioned. Our storage account in resource group 3 is also gone. It's decommissioned. And resource group 2 has still got our storage account 2 in it, even though it was set to be decommissioned today, but it won't, because we have the lock on here, the resource lock, to prevent delete. So I can just remove this lock once I want this to decommission, because the function will look at today's date or any dates prior. So if I wanted to keep this resource for a few days extra, maybe 2 or 3 days extra, I could just put a lock on it. And when I'm done with it, I just remove the lock, and that function at midnight will start running again, and it will just decommission that. So I just want to go have a quick look one last time if that monitor has put its entry in just yet. Yes, it's finally got there. So we can see here that, storage account 2 was trying to decommission it, but we can actually see the error here. And the error response is that there should be a lock. It cannot be deleted because there is because this, it's locked, and that's the scope that it's locked at. So yeah, pretty cool. If you ever, if you want to track your decommissions and you go, oh, I've got a bunch of failed decommissions, you could just come into the monitoring of the function, and you can kind of see everything, all of the output of that script. And again, like I said, this function, it costs 3 pence to run. It's going to save you a lot of time and stuff, and it's just a really nice way to automate resource decommissions, and you can track it through the table storage. Yeah, and that concludes the demo. I saw someone did post the link to the blog, which has got also step-by-step everything, and also link to all the scripts and stuff that I've used here. So yeah, just that's it. I don't know if there's any other questions from anyone. Doesn't look like it.
Wait and see. Marcel, that was, oh, there we go. I think you just got one there in the chat just come through. Or did you answer that one? I think you did, yeah. The code for decommissioning bit, please. Trying to understand I can remove any type you throw at it. Sorry if I've missed this.
Yes, so anything that you can tag basically will be targeted. So say, for example, so there's 2 elements to the decommissioning. You can either tag resource groups, or you can tag resources. Now, if you have a resource group with a bunch of resources in it, and you tag the resources and you tag the resource group as well, obviously the resource group is evaluated before the resources. So resource groups will always be decommissioned first. Now, a nice thing about Azure is if you have a lock on a resource inside of a resource group, the resource group cannot be decommissioned. So you will get a failure. But so there is kind of a hierarchy to this. So resource groups get evaluated first, followed by resources. If they are taggable resources, they will be evaluated and removed. Resource logs at the lowest level. So if you have, again, like I say, if you have a resource group that you want to decommission today, and you have resources inside of that resource group that has got locks on them, the resource group will not be decommissioned. Because that lock overrides the resource as well as the resource group that the resource is inside of. But if you don't put anything on the resource group. You could just do individual resources. It doesn't really matter. However you want to do it is up to you, really. As long as you have a tag called decommissioned and a date value, which is day/month/year. Again, you can go into the script and change that if you want. It's up to you how you want to evaluate that value. That date value is totally up to you. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's cool, Marcel. I suppose the second part to that question there from James about purging the activity log, purging the logs, the table storage log entries, I presume he's meaning there. You know, when you're adding those logs to the tracker and the failed, I guess it's just a case of they stay there until you delete them, or you could potentially create a function to remove those after a certain date, I guess, if you wanted to.
Exactly. Yeah. Table storage is just it's almost like a spreadsheet. It just creates rows and you can, you know.
It's a nice history to have, I suppose, over time. You know, you might not want to purge it potentially, and you can see what resources you deleted. But Marcel, that was amazing. I was literally glued to everything you were doing there. It was, you know, a really great demo to show how some of these components of Azure can be used for new creative and clever ways to kind of manage things like that. So yeah, awesome demo. Right, show your appreciation for Marcel's talk. Come off mute or use the little virtual icons. But yeah, thanks a lot, Marcel. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll share as well in the chat here the link to the blog that shows how you can take what I just showed you and add that send grid function in so that you can actually get emails from the function as well. If you're interested in that, I didn't demo that, but I'll add that in extra here for you as well, for anyone who's interested really in that.
Absolutely. No, that's amazing. No, thanks again, Marcel. So, right, don't go anywhere, everybody. We've got our quiz. If you can stick around for another 10 minutes or so. But yeah, big shout out. Thanks for both speakers tonight. We'll have a quick wrap up after the quiz. But in the interest of time, let's move straight on over to Mr. Fatunka and crack on with tonight's quiz.
Jump to the quiz. Yeah. Okay. So as John said, we're using menti.com tonight. Everyone should be able to see that one.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So it's menti.com and type in that code, isn't it, Matt?
Yep. And then where's me?
Try and go to it as well. And I suppose, are we going to do first and second place prize, £25 Amazon voucher each again? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's good. Oh, got people jumping in. That's good. Good odds tonight.
I'm seeing a little heart on my screen, Matt.
Yep.
That's all you see, is it?
Yeah, I think so. I can never remember. If I press next, I don't want to start the quiz. That's the problem.
Yeah, click next. I think you do, because we had this last month.
Ah, there we go.
Oh, no, it does. Oh, mate. No, there we go. Is that people joining?
No, I think that was the start of the quiz.
I think it might have been people. Do it again.
Do it again. I can never remember.
Yeah, enter your name. Right, that's it. Leave it there now.
Right,
so
okay.
I think you can enter your name.
Ah, there we are. Yeah. It's been at least a month since I did this.
Yeah, we had the same when we did the community thing last month. It was like, right, okay, so I'm the strawberry. So is there any more? So we've got, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us, and I'm not going to be claiming a prize. So there's good odds on the. What we got 14 in the chat. So give us a shout if you're struggling to get in for whatever reason. But is everybody joining us? A few people got to shoot off. Thanks everybody for joining us. If you've got to shoot, we understand.
Okay.
Shout now, otherwise this is going to be an awesome chance to win £25. How are we looking? Any more struggling to get in?
No, I can see. Begun. Yeah, we'll just start up, I think. In the interest
I
of
agree. Let's go for it.
good odds tonight. 1 in 5. How old is Azure this month? Everyone's voted, and the right answer is, yep, it's 12. On to the next. We'll rattle through these. In what year was the current Azure portal released? And bonus marks if you can remember what the code name was.
Oh,
Not
God.
actually bonus marks.
It was the Blade system, wasn't it?
It was, only one person got that. It was the Ibiza portal.
The beta, that's it.
Question 3. Which of the following is not part of Azure Static Web Apps Enterprise Grade Edge? It's a great marketing-based title for a service. So it's an amalgamation of 3 products. And which one of those is not included? Yeah, most people knew that one. So it's a combination of front door, CDN, and static web apps. Fun. Azure Functions GA'd which feature this month? It should be GA'd, not GAs. Is it PowerShell and Linux? Is it SQL binding? Is it Functions Runtime 4.0 or .NET 6.0? All questions were correct at the time of writing. It was PowerShell and Linux. Well done to those that knew that. 5. Azure Container Apps got which new feature in preview this month? This was a biggie. This was an important one, certainly for a lot of my enterprise customers. It was custom VNet support. It's a really important one. Wasn't there in the initial preview and is now available. 6. How many tags can be added to a typical Azure resource? And I say typical because there's a few outliers where this doesn't apply. The 3 of you that knew it was 50 are right. Is that been our leaderboard? Leaderboard is looking... Neil and Darren, it's looking good for you at the moment. We're ignoring Mr. Chips there. The next. Microsoft recently stopped the biggest ever DDoS attack. How big was it? And if you've been joining us about 3 months ago, I put up exactly the same question with a different answer.
Nothing like a bit of consistency, eh?
Yep, we keep upping the ante on how big these attacks are with stopping.
Oh no, it wasn't that big. It was bigger.
It was. 2.4 terabytes was the previous best. 3.47 was the new record, which is a hell of a lot of bytes going through. Which character in PowerShell specifies a variable? In honor of our guest tonight. Yes, most of you knew that one. Question 9. How many tags can be added to an Azure CDN? Now, when I said that there were some outliers, this may or may not be one of them. Oh, only one of you got that. Yeah, it's dramatically reduced down to 15. What's the Azure CLI command to change the subscription? Account update, account set, subscription set, or config update? And I'm loving me a bit of He-Man at the moment. So.
By the power of Grayskull, eh?
Account set. Ooh. We need to brush up on some of your CLI commands. Question 11. Do all Azure commercial regions support availability zones? And this was me literally searching the word available or availability on Imager and seeing what GIF came up. We came up back with. You're absolutely right. No, there are a few regions, West UK being one of the most notable. And lastly, what's the maximum length of a tag name in characters? It's 64 characters, 256 characters, 128 characters, or 512 characters. And I will say that the length of a tag value is different. It's 512. Tag value, I think, is 256. One tonight. Let's see what we've got on the leaderboard.
Drum roll, please.
It's looking. Oh, there's been a change at the top.
There has been a change. Oh. So that's Neil.
Neil and Darren, by the looks of it.
So,
Neil and Darren C.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that's well, I can see that's Neil Cook and Darren Chappelle. Right, guys, I'll drop my details in the chat if you want to just contact me any which way you see fit. Yeah, there's my details, and just drop me your email, and I'll get that Amazon voucher. So that's a £25 Amazon voucher winging its way to both of you. So yeah, make sure you drop your details over to me. That would be most appreciated. Cool. Thanks, Matt. As always, Quizmaster.
Pleasure.
Right, let's wrap this up then. So yes, right, you should see the last slide. I am sharing my screen, aren't I? Yeah, I don't know what screen I'm on anymore.
I can see it.
Right, yes, congratulations to both the winners. As per usual, huge thanks to our speakers, and thank you to everybody for coming along to tonight to watch this session. It's really appreciated. You know, love having everybody here and love having all the fantastic speakers. So thanks to both Marcel and Heiko for giving up your time for tonight. On to next month. We have our very own Mr. Fatunka giving us a talk next month, which is going to be a cool one and might change the way we do the quiz, eh, Matt?
It might well do that, yes.
Not giving the game away too much. But and we've got Elkin joining us as well. So looking at Bicep, we're using Bicep with Azure as well. So some awesome speakers again. What can we say? We keep getting these awesome folk to the Welsh Azure user group every month. So like we say, thanks everybody for joining. We'll call it a night there. If you do get the time, please do scan that QR code or browse that link and drop us some feedback. It really is appreciated if you can give us sort of 5 minutes of your time just to do that. The next event, put it in your diaries now or jump onto the meetup page and RSVP is on the 16th of March. Same time, it's kicking off around about 6:30 for a couple of hours. So yeah, that brings us to say thank you for joining us and have a great rest of the month. And we'll see you next month. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks all.